I think I've said the word excited maybe 4 times already today in the last 20 minutes. I am really just overjoyed to share in our final Winter Institute this beautiful human being with you all. Michelle Lee, I met in 2006 when I was a young classroom teacher, really struggling to find a way to bring the curriculum into my classroom in a way that was relevant and engaging for my students. I think Mush was an even younger, really powerful poet with a program called Youth Speaks. And she used her lived experience, her critical analysis, her raw humanity, and incredible skill with word and delivery to support my young folks, maybe weekly for the semester. And I engaged with Youth Speaks for many years, many semesters with this program, this Chapter 1 program to bring poets into my classroom as a English teacher, as a health teacher. And she's the executive director of this organization now. It's just really, really beautiful to see your growth and your power just take up the space it deserves. So with that, I introduce you to Michelle Lee. What an honor.
Thank you so much, Ori. There's a lot to be said. First, I want to thank everybody for taking time out to be with us today. I want to invite everybody again, if we could, to just take a deep breath. Also, let's see if I can see some of us. The keynote address that I prepared is actually not the keynote address that I'm going to give. I hope that's okay. But I promise there will be story. And I promise that, we'll do a little bit of everything that Oriana has spoken so eloquently about. But I do want to invite us to do something. Does everybody have a phone with photos on it? So this is actually the keynote that we're going to be doing. And keynotes are really funny. I really, in this time, in this moment, and I hate listening to people. So I apologize that you have to listen to me, but as well, I'm honored that I get to share some things. My hope is that this is more of a story-based keynote. I'm a poet born and raised in San Francisco, born in the 80s. Grandparents lived from the time they immigrated here from South Korea to the time that they died in the Tenderloin, which is a beautiful and rough around the edges city, a part of the city in San Francisco. So I say that to put a little bit of context into who I am. I found poetry in the church. I found hip hop and oral poetry and spoken word in a community of mostly Black artists. And it was, I kind of stuck out like a sore thumb. I don't know if anyone else has ever felt that, but, little Asian girl doing poetry, really into hip hop and R&B and SWV. And you would think that in San Francisco, that's something that's super common. Still, I stuck out wherever I went. But I'll tell you that it was the story, when I got to the story of who I am truly, when I'm not trying to sound like anyone else, when I'm not trying to sound like a poet or smart or kind of like, the healer of all healers, is when I truly felt like I was liberated. So I hope that I can share a piece of that with you today, wherever you sit in whatever worlds and all of the worlds that you sit. Story time with art and music. Yep, Willamette, that's right. I'm not very good with the music or the art part, but yeah, sometimes they call me a poet. Okay, so a couple of things, and we'll get back to the phone in just a second, but you don't have to do anything yet. But I do want to ask if everybody could please either have something to write with and on. If you do it on your phone and that's kind of that's where you flow, great. If you are still old school like me and you like pen and paper, pull something next to your favorite journal. If you like to type, go ahead and open up a Windows Word document or something, and then we'll put that to the side for now. Can everybody put up their phone, at least the folks that I can see? If you've got your phone, yep. This is a stress test here. We got our phones? Yes. I know some of us are probably driving or tuning in and kind of checking in, but not checking in. If you're driving, please don't show me the phone. But wonderful. Okay, everybody else who is on screen, thank you, first of all, for being on screen. I'm not shaming anybody who's not on screen. So this is what I want to invite you to do. I can tell you all the things about stories. I've probably read and studied and researched stories more than anybody I know. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying the truth. We're not going to get into all of it, but we're going to try in the next 30 minutes to share the most important stories and the most important research that I think is valuable to share with this community. But first, can you take out your phone or wherever your digital pictures live? If you have an actual photo, book next to you, amazing. And I want to invite you to do this. I actually don't think we have time to do the original exercise, but in the next 60 seconds, can you open up your phone to the photos and take 60 seconds to look through and review the pictures that you've taken in the last year? That's the only invitation. Go ahead and just 60 seconds. I'll let you know when time is up. Scroll without judgment, without review, just scroll. And remember, and again, this is not a race. You don't have to get through to the first picture of 2024. Just take in a few more images and moments. And to the extent that you're comfortable, in the chat, I want to invite you to write down what you felt as you were looking through the pictures. Just a feeling. Just a feeling. And as folks are writing what they felt, I'd actually like to invite the rest of the group to witness and read your colleagues' responses, emotions. Nostalgia, laughed, hold, accomplished. Heavy year, yep. Warm, gratitude, proud, hope, loved, grandchildren. Grateful, beautiful. I also want to invite you. I'm not going to pretend. The last 10 days, if not the last 48 hours, has probably been a roller coaster. I don't know if anybody else can agree. Maybe it's just me in my living room panicking at all times at 3 o'clock in the morning about the state of the world, and the news continues to deliver, the most traumatic event. In the next 30 minutes, 20 minutes that we have, I want to invite you to think about somebody who you love, somebody that you're thinking of. And if you could dedicate just the next little bit of time that you're giving yourself to be here, if you could also honor that person. And if you're comfortable, if you could put that person's name in the chat. Does anybody in the room consider themselves a stellar poet, a writer, or an exceptionally gifted artist? Storytelling, I've done this for more than 20 years. And believe it or not, yes, like Oriana said, I started with young people in San Francisco and Oakland public high schools, eventually started working with teachers, then started working with principal leaders and district leaders. And then somehow I found myself working with global tech executives around something that's called organizational storytelling. We're not going to get into that because that's kind of boring. There are so many more important things to talk about. But the three things that I want to share before we start are these: that storytelling itself is not exclusively for creative people. And we can debate this later after the Institute is over. Some people believe that there's no scientific or there's no method behind how to deliver and gather great stories. Not true. The third is that storytelling is really just about the individual and personal transformation. Also, research-backed science says that that's not true. Again, these are three separate keynotes. We'll get into that later, but I wanted to share those three things now because some of us are like, oh my God, this is a story-based keynote. I have to do some writing or storytelling. That's not my jam. That's not my lane. I promise you, these are three of the biggest myths. Truly, if you're here, if you're ready to get a little bit, in your heart space, I promise you, it's important for all of us actually to start to activate the storyteller within us because of the moment that we're in. If no other reason, if you love a student, if you love a colleague, if you love a young person in this world, it is so important right now that all of us really embrace that identity as storyteller. And I'll tell you why. Okay. So I said a little bit about the moment that we're in. Can somebody anybody in the chat just kind of drop for us? What have you heard in the news? Or what are you hearing? What are some of the anxieties that are sitting with you, that are circling in your mind, in the staff room, at meetings? Yep. Everything freaking sucks. I also want to share with you a couple of things that I've heard in the last 10 days. So I've never given this particular keynote, but I felt like I needed to create something that felt urgent and of the moment. So maybe some of you can agree. These are sentiments that I've heard. Anybody heard the world is burning? That the city is burning? We're in California, many of us, and the LA fires we know somebody who's lost something or someone. But also some of the other things that I've heard. I can't afford to live here. I've probably traumatized my kids. My favorite neighbor voted for Trump. My mom has no papers. I'm going back into hiding. I don't feel safe at church. I can't trust my dentist. I'm burnt out. I buried my dad this week. I haven't been on a date in 3 years, but I also don't like people or places or going out past 7. And I don't like people. That's an interesting one. I feel so heavy. And I think I'm the problem. Drop an emoji, a word in the chat if you've heard from somebody else, not your own brain. Say one, if not more, of these lines. My God, it feels good. Not that these things feel good, but it feels so good to know that this is not just happening in the isolation of our own lives and world. So that's really part of today. Whether it's through this session, whether it's through the next sessions or the debrief at the end of the Institute today, remember that we're not alone. And it's easy to forget that in times of despair. A couple of things just to make it more painful. I'm sorry. Actually, these numbers have gotten higher, but I did want to share, and I'm sure I'm probably joined by some of the smartest people in the country, so I know that these aren't necessarily new figures to you, but I'm just going to leave these up here. These are statistics and research. Actually, that first number is 79%. I want to update that. The U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy cited a 2023 report that have those numbers higher. So whether you're a young person, the middle percentage, 40, is actually representative of anyone who either holds the title of CEO, president, or some type of executive or leadership role in their workplace. So everything is burning. My heart is heavy. None of us know what to do. Has anybody heard in the last 10 days or in the last month, like, we've never been here before? So the question, I feel like in times of despair, and I thought about, I don't have time to go into the word despair, but the despair is like the pit of the pits. It's beyond sorrow. It's even deeper in some ways than grief. A lot of times in moments of despair, as I was thinking and preparing this presentation, I thought, what could I possibly say? What could I possibly offer? I'm also feeling all of these things at the same time. And I had to dig deep. Thank you, Oriana. Thank you, Liara. Thank you, Nikki, for challenging me to dig deep. because I remembered a very, very valuable truth. And sometimes it really does in moments where it feels like existential crisis. It is so easy to forget some really basic truths. But I needed somebody that's like a doctor to remind me of this. I'm sorry. I'm very, very superficial here. US Surgeon General Vivek Murthy has been studying this kind of epidemic of loneliness and isolation among young people, but also in young adults, but also working professionals for since the pandemic. This is not new. Some of us have been following this research, but it's just now kind of bubbling into the national dialogue. But recently he came out and offered some solutions. Yes, he's been on the media circuit. He's been talking to Oprah and all the podcast folks. Really, he says that the antidote is human connection. Very simple. I think all of us know this. More specifically, if we want to break down what human connection might look like in our own lives to solve these numbers, even if it's incremental, if we're shaving some of these numbers down just by a fraction of a percentage, here are 3 potential solutions: deeper conversations, service, caring for others beyond our own well-being, through our own well-being as well, and community. And it's about quality, not quantity. Real quick poll in the chat again, or off mic. Does anybody here feel like they're having a harder time leaving their home? It just feels a little bit harder to want to go out? Or is that totally just me? Now this has become a keynote about how I just don't like to leave my living room, and I apologize that disappointing everybody so early in the morning. Yes, okay, thank goodness. Okay, so this is basically a call to action to say this is actually a real thing. This is going to act the next 4 weeks, the next 6 months, the next 12 months. It's going to require us to do more and to be uncomfortable. That is just the hard truth. And I know most of us know this, but I needed this reminder that it's not supposed to feel easy. Hard work in times of injustice, in despair, in times of divisiveness like the one we're in, require hard acts of good service. Hard acts of good service. Okay. I want to invite everybody to take a breath. You don't have to do it tonight. I'm not asking anybody to start making social engagements tonight or trying to go to happy hour. That's not what you don't have to join the horticulture club tomorrow. Just put it in your back pocket. I do want to invite everybody to take a breath. When I asked you to look at the pictures in your phone, as you were looking through your phone, are there stories that live beside and beyond the images themselves that can't necessarily be seen? I get it. I see people nodding. Yes, we know that there's more to the story beyond the images. I know that I imagine most of us are not writers. That's not what we spend our most of our day doing. So I thought I would break it down and make it very, very simple. At Youth Speaks, which is the organization that I've worked with, we work with young people 13 to 26 and around arts education, voice, imagination, spoken word. And one of the things that we discovered when teachers kept asking us and parents kept asking us, how is it that you are able to get this student or my child or my goddaughter or my niece to write in a way that I've never been able to? And I see them every day. They live with me. I can't get them to do what it is that you do. Can you please unpack that thing? We didn't know. I've been around 21 years. In the first 10 years that we were founded, we had no idea how to answer that question with legitimately. We just knew that what we were doing was right. So we started studying ourselves. We took another 10 years to look at exactly what it is educators, teaching artists, poets were doing when we were leading young people and young writers into the discovery of their own voice. And I'll share, there's an entire methodology that we've developed, but the one thing that I want to leave with you, and I'll put it in the chat, is this idea of life as primary text. And Oriana has heard me say this again and again and again. It is so simple, but we had, as poets, we had to give it a name, this thing that we were doing. And it is this idea that often when we learn about something that somebody says is important, we often look outside before we look in for the answers. We flipped that paradigm on its head and said, actually, if a young person or a writer or a storyteller is truly going to have authentic power and true access to their imaginations, not the imaginations of others that are also inspiring and acclaimed, they need to understand and start with the story of their life and validating that, because for so many of our young people, trans students, children of immigrants, BIPOC young folks, queer, gender questioning, two-spirited young folks, our stories are not written with us. So we had to create those spaces where those stories could be written by us. Does that make sense? So life is primary text. So the invitation here is to forget every author that you've ever kind of loved. Well, maybe not. Put that to the side. And this is really just about you. Oh my God, this is not a professional development about how to integrate stuff into my classroom or my next PD or no. This is just about you. This is you. This is not your colleague. This is not your supervisor, Matt. This is not the student that's excelling or that needs you. It's not about any, this is you time. And please write to the extent that you're comfortable. You will not have to share any of this if you don't want. All right. We're going to keep it very, very simple. I'm going to ask you, or you're going to see a series of 6 questions. Now is a great time to take out the paper, the pen, the Word document, the phone app, whatever it is. Everybody ready? 6 poems. That's it. But here's the thing. There's 6 separate poems, but each poem is going to be a response to a prompt or question that you'll see on the screen. The only rule is that each of these prompts, they can only be 7 words. So you are going to be writing 6 individual poems that are each 7 words in length. Is that clear? Okay. So think of these as separate, like, wow, Mush, really? I can create a poem that's a 7-word poem. Yes. Hemingway did it all the time. 6-word poems, 7-word poems. I thought, how do we create meaning, or how do we create understanding out of a moment that feels so messed up? I don't care politically where you sit. I think everybody in this country, on this planet, is feeling some sort of existential. How do you make meaning out of that? And I spent a lot of time thinking about and preparing today, because this was a new moment for me. I'm 42 years old. Yes, I presented for over 20 years. This is what I do in my life. I do story. I know this better than anybody. And I had a hard time until I realized maybe there's something to creating a story out of many stories. And I'll go into that in just a moment. Okay, everybody ready? All right, we'll spend about 60 seconds, about a minute for each of these questions, and write at your own kind of, again, 7 words, 6 questions. There's a framework that comes out of Harvard that talks about, different frameworks for storytelling beyond the personal. Professor Marshall Gantz over at Harvard talks and has this framework around public narratives. I'll talk about what that is in just a little bit, but he says that there are 3 components to big storytelling. One is a story of now, the story of you, and the story of us. We'll get into a little bit, but really this is the story of now. So the story of now. And then we'll get to the 6 poems. So I'm going to take a look at these images. They're going to pass through. And then at the end, I'm going to invite you to think about what you just saw. We saw a series of images. I was talking about Marshall Gantz and a little bit about the difference between stories and narratives, and this thing called culture. I promise we will get into the writing exercise in just a minute, but I needed to kind of share this first to make meaning over kind of all the stories that we're hearing. A lot of times people use the word story and narratives interchangeably, but in the field that I work in, which is the field of like organizational storytelling and narrative change, there's a framework that says that there are stories that come from the individual. You put many stories together, whether they're 5 different unique stories or 5 million stories. If you consolidate those, you create a meta narrative or a meta story. So a narrative is the summation of many, many stories coming together in some type of cohesive way that reinforces a value, a meaning. It says something about what we're saying. Culture, think of it as the entire galaxy if we're using kind of a constellation star metaphor. Culture is the thing that we as people get to change, but it also changes with how we are changed by it. Put those together and we try to find a single story that threads through all of yours that we can consider a narrative. So I asked earlier, what are the things that we're hearing right now? What are we hearing in colleagues, in friends, at the dinner table? I imagine that actually some of those things are, they sound like individual stories and experiences, but they're actually part of a larger narrative that we are synthesizing even without realizing. In the chat, I'd like to invite anybody to answer the question. What is one possible narrative? If you were to put each of these things together and come up with a single sentence, the fall of the empire, there's so much uncertainty, inflammation, uncertainty. We have to be disciplined in hope. Why did we fall? Amazing. A ball of confusion. Yep. And there's resistance and refusal in the face of domination. Oh boy, out of control. Yeah, it's crazy. And just as we were looking through our phones, we know that there are more than the stories that have become the dominant narrative of this particular moment. We know that. So we are more than the stories of despair. I'm just going to say this very quickly. Another framework. Sometimes it's easier to pay attention to the stories of tragedy. But the reason I started kind of my storytelling business almost 7 years ago was because I was tired of seeing the stories on the left dominate my classrooms, my meetings, my conversations with friends, and the headlines in the news, because I knew I've spent 22 years listening to thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And by year 20, I understood that there's a common thread. If I were to take all 10,000 stories I've ever read or heard, I could also find that there are greater stories to the right. There are always stories of forgiveness. There's always a fight story. There's always a love story. And believe it or not, there's always a redemption story. And those things are greater, at least I have found, than even the stories of trauma, abuse, and despair and grief. So I just want to remind us that we don't always hear it on CNN. We're not always going to hear it on MSNBC or Time or the Times. But if we listen enough, there are actually more stories of those on the right, although sometimes the stories on the left seem louder. Okay, 6 questions, 7 words. Let's scrap the 7 words just because that does take more time. So I'll ask 6 questions and do your best to give the very first response that you can. That's the top of mind. So don't dig too deeply. Whatever language comes to you, please write those words down. So let's make this a single sentence poem rather than a 7-word poem. We ready? What is the best advice you've given someone who just lost something precious or someone precious? 1 line, very quickly. Why did you stay silent? Again, one sentence, very quick. Next question. Just a couple more left. If you could heal anyone in your community, who would it be? Complete the sentence. When we are blank, we are not. And then a synonym for afraid. When we are blank, we are not. Another word for afraid. Okay, so does everybody have 6 sentences or 6 lines? Yes? Okay. So this is going to be the funnest and fastest poem ever. So I said earlier that sometimes in moments of craziness, chaos, despair, confusion, when we don't know what's ahead, it's always helped me to take something that feels scattered, disorganized, but still true to me, and find some type of metaphor in putting those things together. So I'm going to invite you to at least screenshot this, or I can also drop a template. But let's see how much we can do. This is called a Pantone poem, and it's basically 4 lines. It can be as long as you want. And the rules are really simple, is that the second and the fourth line of each stanza serves as the first and the third line of the next stanza. But don't worry, I know that sounds complicated. This is what I'd like you to do in the next 2.5 minutes. Take each of the lines. You have 6. Line A1 is A, line 2 is B, line 3 is C, line 4 is D, line 5 is E, line 6 is F. And if you could arrange your sentences into these 3 stanzas. Don't worry so much about the order, honestly. The idea is that we take these threads, disparate threads. I imagine that not all of your responses was about a single person in your life or even a single moment in your life, but that they come from lots of different places in your memory and in your story. And the idea is to try to braid those things together. And sometimes those things will teach us or say something or show us a different way of understanding this particular moment. I know my time, I'm a little bit over, so I want to thank you. And I also want to thank the next facilitators for their grace and for allowing me a few more minutes to finish.
Thank you, Mush. Thank you so much. I really do wish we had 2 hours to like really create space to hold all of these parts with integrity. But thank you so much. You did an absolutely beautiful job supporting us in centering our lived experience and I think honoring it. I feel a little more like the my lived experience is primary text. I think that so often I do look externally for the pathway towards healing, and you just really affirmed for me that the medicine is within, the pathway is within, and I'm really curious around how I might continue to create the context, the relationships, and the practices that support me in staying within. So
Thank
deep,
you.
deep appreciation for you. I'm
Ori, may I share one thing with the group
Yeah,
as we transition,
yes.
which is that I know that the keynote was about memory. And I think more than even storytelling, the thing that I want to share with you in this group is the idea that your life is not worth investigating or interrogating to find power is one of the biggest lies that we've been told.
Mhm.
And so I say that to say, if we don't look into the areas or the moments in our life where we were powerful, where we did overcome that dark night of the soul, how are we going to go forward? Because the story right now is a story of fear, is what I hear, confusion, and I don't know what to do next. And the invitation is really to remember that we've already done some version of this in a different scale. So be encouraged, um, and look to yourself before and as we start to connect, have deeper conversations, connect with community, and start to make ourselves in service of others who need us. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think in first glance, it can feel like we've never been here before. And when we slow down, look in and look back, right? This idea of Sankofa as well is like really resonating for me. We have absolutely faced iterations of this. And so yes, yes. Please connect with Mush, with You Speaks, with the Whole Story group to continue kind of investigating ways in which we can bring this slowness and inquiry into our spaces. Um, I'm excited to look through the poems and the words here.